Good morning, everybody, and welcome to a brand new week. It has been a very busy morning around here. I had a super long workout. I did 2 bike rides with Olivia on the Peloton this morning, and my arms and my core. It was just, I need to start off my week in a good way. Last week, my vacation actually got canceled due to a family emergency. Everything's okay now, but kind of bummed out about that. And I'm at that point in the summer when my kids have been gone for a very long time, and I'm actually kind of missing them. So I'm using my mug with their little faces on it from 2009. That's our old dog, Soho. Her sisters, Gramercy and Tribeca, are in their crates taking a nap. So I'm ready to get this week started. I hope you are too. I am so excited to welcome this week's guest. Amanda Hahn-Peters and I met on Twitter and had a virtual coffee at some point during this whole pandemic craziness and got to know each other. And I got to know, not only is she a freelancer as far as a content marketer and social media manager, she is also a retired professional triathlete. And she's the one person on Twitter that doesn't mind listening to me brag about my son and his running time. So I'm super excited. Let me tell you a little bit about Amanda. Like I said, she's a retired professional triathlete turned corporate marketer, turned freelance copywriter and social media manager. Amanda combines her love of words and passion for helping people to create impactful strategies and messaging for brands that are on a mission to make the world a better place. So now I'm going to introduce you to my friend Amanda, if I can get these screens going. There we go. Hi, Amanda. Welcome.
Hi, Shane. Good morning.
Good morning. I'm so glad you're here. I do know that Amanda's cat Merlin is also joining us. So if you hear a meow, that's who
Yes,
that is.
yes.
So I'm so happy that you're here. And I really just enjoyed getting to know you, not just as a marketer, but just as a person and a woman out there on Twitter. It's just really nice to know you as a human. So I'm so glad that you're joining us this morning. Why don't you tell us? I know I read your bio, but why don't you just tell us a little bit more about who you are, what you do, and why you're passionate about it?
Sure. Well, first of all, I'm going to start off by saying I really appreciate those messages and keeping up with your son's running career because that's always so exciting to me to have a fellow runner or run parent in the Twitterverse. Um, but yeah, like you said, I'm a little bit of a career Barbie, if you will. Most of my professional career has been as a professional triathlete. That's not something I grew up saying. When I grew up, I'm going to be a professional athlete. It's something that just kind of honestly fell into my lap. And when I was graduating college, I had the opportunity to join the U.S. national team for triathlon, and that was known as the elite development team at the time. And so I thought to myself, I'd love to do this whole triathlon career, but I'd also love to go back and do grad school in mass communications, and maybe I can work part-time. So I moved out to Colorado and had the full intention of putting my grad school at Florida State on hold, coming back the next year, training there, and just seeing how it went. But I actually ended up staying in Colorado. And I quickly realized if I was going to be a professional triathlete, this was something that I was going to have to devote my entire life to. So grad school got put on hold for quite a while. Just devoted my life to triathlon and to racing for the U.S. and trying to make world championships, Olympic trials. And so unfortunately, that dream came to a very abrupt end around 2015 when I had an injury. And so I kind of had to decide, what is going to be my career path from here? What am I going to do with my life? And so 2 questions I asked myself were, what do I love doing? Number one. And number two, what do I love doing that can actually help others? And so I kind of came back to writing, and I was really interested in digital marketing at the time. So I decided to go into digital marketing, get my master's in digital marketing. And from there, I went into the corporate world and worked an agency job for a little bit just to kind of get my feet wet and see what I like doing. And yeah, from there, I kind of was able to see where am I most able to help people. And I decided to kind of branch off into the social media and copywriting world. So here I am today.
Here you are
Here you
today.
are today.
That's a
Yeah.
great
That's a
story. I
great
love
story.
it.
I love it.
So tell me a little bit about, as a professional athlete, what are some of the things that you learned that have helped you in your marketing social media career?
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, I could probably chat all day on this, but so one thing I learned is you have to really be adaptable. Um, I would, I would show up to international races where I trained for months, thinking it was going to be a specific race course. And then I'd get over there and, there might be a 10-foot waves the morning of the race, and all of a sudden the swim's canceled. And they say, you know what, we're just going to have you do a 5K instead of the ocean swim. So you're running 15K total instead of a 5K. And
Wow.
you just have to kind of be able to go with the flow. And I feel like that's a skill that you need as a social media manager, because our platforms are just constantly changing and you have to be able to keep up with these changes. I mean, for example, I know last week Twitter announced that they're getting rid of their fleets. So if that was part of your content strategy, all of a sudden you have to say, okay, what else are we doing? Where can we kind of pivot those efforts and still stay relevant, still reach our audience?
Right,
So that.
absolutely. And I have to say,
Mhm.
I'm kind of glad the fleets are going away. They just don't fit. I swear. They were just
Yeah, they
kind of,
were.
they're fun and they add to it, but I didn't feel that they were a huge added bonus to what we were already doing. I can see the purpose of stories on Instagram and other platforms. I don't know, Twitter, I kind of felt like, okay, you gave this a shot. Good call.
Right. Yeah. Yeah,
And
and
I
I think
wish
they
I,
were kind of cramped up there with the Twitter Spaces as
right.
well.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And Twitter Spaces is really fun. But you're right about being adaptable. And I've always said I'm not good with plan B. I was always like, if I had a hair appointment and my toddler had a fever and couldn't go to preschool, I wasn't good with that. And I feel like all of us are kind of good with it now that we've lived through COVID and, are we going to meet in person? Are we going to be virtual? What's going on? And kind of being able to pivot in that with a moment's notice. I think that's kind of taught all of us what we're capable of. So I'm not sure I can
Absolutely.
still claim to not be good with plan B because I have no choice anymore. I think we all have to deal with it.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
absolutely.
yeah, so you and I are similar in that we serve as an outsourced voice in a social media capacity for our clients. So you're a freelancer, I'm a freelancer, somewhat. I have a team as well, but we both kind of fill that role. One of the things that has been really important to me, and I'm curious your take on it, is just making sure that there are brand standards and brand guidelines in place. I find that when we take on a voice or a client, if they don't have that, it can take us longer to kind of get the ball rolling and build that foundation to really create a brand. And I'm curious on your take on how important brand guidelines and brand standards are for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that having those brand guidelines in place really helps you to have a cohesive brand. You know that whoever, if there are multiple people working on content for that brand, that's one way to ensure consistency. Because you can always go back to the brand guidelines. You can say, okay, what's their mission? What are the
Mm-hmm.
overall business goals? And what are the emotions this brand is trying to evoke? What are the words they use?
Right.
So if I were to, for example, I work with we'll call them a baby boomer at home hair color brand. So if I were to just throw some Gen Z slang in there, their audience might be like, okay, this
Mm-hmm.
is not on brand. Like, what's happening?
Right.
So
That's an
it's
excellent
really
point.
all about maintaining that consistency, and that consistency builds trust over time.
Absolutely. And what we're always trying to do is build a community, not just an audience. And I've talked about this
Right.
with a few of my guests. I'd love your take on the difference between a community versus an audience when you're looking at a marketing method.
Sure, yeah. So the way I like to think of it is think of yourself as an audience. If you are watching a movie, you're not communicating with those actors. They're not going to talk back to you if you're like, oh, whoa, like what a crazy scene. They're not going to be like, yeah, I agree.
Right.
They're broadcasting that movie to you. Whereas community, I see it as a two-way conversation. You would maybe go ask your neighbor to borrow a loaf of bread or a cup of flour.
Right.
So
Right.
you're actively engaged in a conversation, and you're hopefully being provided resources that'll keep you engaged and keep you interested in that community.
Yes, absolutely. Well said. And, both of us kind of have these same challenges when we're working to build that community and taking over for a client. Sometimes we may have a client who's not really ready to let go and they want to make sure that everything is 100% sounding like them. And we're kind of more, as long as it's close enough to what your brand voice should be, then I think that we can grow it from there. But sometimes, there can be a little micromanagement that can be frustrating. What are some of the challenges that you have when you're taking over a voice? And let's also talk a little bit about managing client expectations as far as return on investment, always the big question.
Sure. Yeah. I guess I'll start with the return on investment. I mean, I feel like you really have to educate people that it's not about the followers. Just because you have more followers, that doesn't mean they're going to be engaged community members. That doesn't necessarily mean they're going to purchase whatever product or service you're selling. So that's why it's a good idea not to use those, I'll call them black hat tactics, where
Mm-hmm.
you're either buying followers or participating in engagement pods, kind of like these certain people will comment on your post all the time. It's just not a good idea, because in the long run, that's not going to get you to your end goal. And, that's not going to drive sales. That's not going to increase engaged community members. So it's really important to focus kind of on the big picture and kind of going back to that consistency over a long period of time,
Right.
which is really
Yeah.
going to help you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And then, sorry, what was the other question?
Oh, just sort of managing expectations as far as, when you're working with a client who maybe isn't really ready to let go yet, even though they've hired you to be their voice. Sometimes, I'll get in a position with a client where I'm like, you've hired me to do a job, so you got to let go a little bit. But, they're not ready to let go. So do you run into that ever where you're like, I've got this, I promise, let me run with it and I'll show you what I can do?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, you don't want a client, posting like 10 minutes after you posted something, because they're like, oh, hey, I have this really great thing, really great picture I want to post. And then you're like, whoa, 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 you're overwhelming the algorithm, and
Right.
that's not good. So you really, you have to kind of sit down and explain the larger strategy at hand to them, and also say, I feel like it's better the more they actually know like what you're doing behind the scenes, can
Yeah.
kind of help them say, here's the research we've done, here's the content you've given us. So knowing this is how we can move forward to kind of nail your brand voice, and
Right.
also help you, build that community.
Right. So when you're building communities, either for yourself or for your clients, which are your favorite platforms on social to use to do that?
So I probably would have said Instagram up until last year.
Okay.
Um, but that switched to Twitter
Yeah.
during the pandemic, just because I had Twitter since about 2009, I think.
Hmm.
But when I was a professional triathlete, it was more like my diary. Like,
Right.
hey, here's a picture of wherever I am in the world, and here's what I'm doing. But I didn't ask questions. I didn't really engage. So there were no conversations happening. And when I came back to Twitter, I kind of used it to say, here's what I'm going through. Here are my thoughts. Can anyone relate? Kind of different human behaviors,
Hmm.
and then just being genuinely curious about people.
Right,
I really
right.
feel like
Yeah, and
helps
you
too.
do. You ask a lot of questions on Twitter, just general questions that get us talking, and I really appreciate that. I'm better at answering than I am with asking because I'm always focused on writing those questions for my clients and I forget to
Right.
do it for myself. But you do a good job of that. You ask a lot of questions and it definitely gets us talking. I think you asked recently, when did everyone join Twitter? And we were all kind of chiming in on that. And it was really interesting to see how many of us in marketing Twitter joined way back in 2008, 2009, and how many joined in like 2015
Yeah.
or later.
Hmm.
So there's never a bad time to dive into Twitter and start talking to people.
Exactly. And
So
especially the Twitter chats, I feel like have just
oh
really
yeah.
taken off in the last couple of years.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've been missing a few lately. I've been really just swamped with meetings and I need to get back into I've missed a few of them and I need to get back on schedule because I miss my friends. Those are my
I know.
people. So
Same
yeah, I
here.
need yeah. So when you're advising small businesses, and we do get small business owners who watch our live stream, what kind of advice do you give them? I know that I kind of start with social is a piece of the marketing mix, but we definitely need a paid strategy, we need PR, we need a web SEO person involved. That's kind of like my first piece of advice, that don't put all your eggs in one basket. What kind of advice do you have for small businesses who are looking to grow a community starting today for their company?
So, first of all, I think it's a good idea to always do a competitive analysis. Just see who's kind of in your space. What are they doing that's working really well? And you never want to copy because, you'll be called out pretty quickly. But it's always a good idea just to write that down for inspiration, saying, are they asking questions? Are they asking you to use emojis or gifs? Kind of what strategies are they using that are working? And then take those strategies and kind of meld it to your own brand to say, what can I do? So I just have kind of like an idea bank when I start working with small businesses. Like, here are some things that I see that are working for other brands.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how can we
Right.
make these work for us?
That's great advice. And it's a great way to see what others are doing and then fine tune that for your own voice so that you can keep it real and have a
Yeah,
real personality on social, which we both
exactly.
know is most important.
Yes.
Well, Amanda, I want to thank you so much for coming today and joining me this morning. It's always good to see you, but especially seeing you live and face to face. And one of these days, maybe we'll be in person face to face, which would be fantastic. But
I
until then, I'm so glad that you were able to join me today. I love hearing about your story with your triathlon experience. It's so fascinating to me, and I love knowing you on Twitter and just kind of seeing what you're up to in your world and in your clients' world. And I hope that we continue to tweet and stay in touch. And it's just good to have you out there as a friend. So thanks for joining me this morning.
Yeah, ditto. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Well, have a great rest of your day. And everyone, thanks for joining me this week. Next week is my guest will be John Clunan, who was supposed to be here a few weeks ago, but got stuck on a plane. So I can't wait to hear what on earth happened that he was stuck on a plane that early in the morning. Because usually that first flight, not a problem. So looking forward to having John. If you don't know him, you can follow him. And in fact, I did not put up how to reach out to Amanda, so I'm putting that up right now. If you want to reach out to Amanda directly, you can follow her at amandahahn-peters.com. You can also follow her on Instagram and Twitter at ahahn-peters. So join her, join me, and I will see you next week. And thank you so much. Thanks for keeping it real. Have a great week, everyone.